By the early 20th century, Europe had carved up nearly all of Africa like a dinner table. 53 colonies, tens of millions of people under foreign rule. And right in the middle of that map sits one country that never got colonized. Not briefly occupied, not informally controlled, not conquered and then liberated, never conquered at all. That country is Ethiopia. And the story of how it stayed free isn't just luck. It's one of the most underrated military and political triumphs in modern history. And it starts with an army that humiliated a European great power so badly that it changed the course of an entire continent's history. Let's get into it. In 1884, European powers sat down in Berlin and basically agreed on the rules for dividing up Africa amongst themselves. Nobody from Africa was in the room. Within a few decades, almost the whole continent was under colonial control. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and a relative latecomer to the game, Italy, all grabbing territory. Italy, in particular, was hungry. It had unified as a nation only in 1861, and it was desperate to prove itself as a great European power with an empire to match. It already held territory along the Red Sea coast, a colony it called Eritrea, and just inland sat the prize Italy really wanted, the ancient highland empire of Ethiopia, known then to outsiders as Abyssinia. On paper, this should have been easy. Italy had modern rifles, artillery, and the backing of European industry. Ethiopia was, in European eyes, just another backward African kingdom waiting to be absorbed. They could not have been more wrong. The man who would wreck Italy's colonial dream was Emperor Menelik II, who took the throne in 1889. And Menelik played a longer, smarter game than almost any other African leader of his era. First, he understood something brutally simple. If you want to survive a European invasion, you need European weapons. So Menelik spent years quietly importing rifles, ammunition, and artillery, buying from France, from Russia, even, in a delicious irony, sometimes from Italy itself, who at one point literally armed the very army that would later defeat them, because they assumed they'd be controlling Ethiopia through influence rather than war. By the mid-1890s, estimates suggest Menelik had stockpiled well over 100,000 rifles and dozens of modern artillery pieces. That's not a spear and shield army, that's a modern fighting force.
Make sure everything is ready.
And this is the part people often miss. Menelik played diplomacy as well as he played logistics. He signed a treaty with Italy in 1889 called the Treaty of Wuchale. The Italian version of the treaty said Ethiopia agreed to conduct its foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making it an Italian protectorate. The Amharic version said Ethiopia could use Italy as a channel for foreign affairs if it chose to. One word's difference, one empire's worth of consequence. When Italy started telling the rest of Europe that Ethiopia was now their protectorate, Menelik said,
"Let it be known, the decree is final. Your compliance is expected."
Something almost no African ruler facing colonization had managed before. He united his fractured multi-ethnic empire, Amhara, Oromo, Tigrayan, and many others, under one banner, mobilized a mass national army, and marched north to meet the Italian.
Together we march!
Freedom!
For freedom!
Forward!
Unity is our strength!
This brings us to March 1st, 1896, the Battle of Adwa. If you've never heard of it, that's honestly part of the point of this video, because it deserves to be remembered alongside any of the great upset battles in world history. The Italian force was around 17,000 men, including Italian regulars and colonial troops. Ethiopia met them with an army historians estimate between 80,000 and 120,000 soldiers, a staggering mobilization for any nation in this era, let alone one Europe assumed couldn't organize at scale. The Italian commander, General Oreste Baratieri, was under enormous political pressure from Rome to attack quickly rather than wait. He split his forces into separate columns to advance through unfamiliar mountain terrain at night using maps that were, and this is almost unbelievable, inaccurate. Some of his units got lost or separated in the dark before the battle even began. Ethiopian forces, fighting on terrain they knew intimately, with artillery support and rifles that matched the Italians, surrounded and crushed the divided Italian columns one by one. The result was catastrophic for Italy. Roughly 6,000 to 7,000 Italian and colonial troops killed, thousands more wounded or captured. It remains one of the most decisive defeats of a European colonial army by an African force in the entire history of the Scramble for Africa. Italy sued for peace. In the Treaty of Addis Ababa later that year, Italy formally recognized Ethiopia's full independence.
Now it's worth pausing here because Ethiopia wasn't the only African society to resist European invasion fiercely. The Zulu kingdom famously crushed a British force at Isandwana in 1879. The modest state in Sudan held off British and Egyptian forces for over a decade. The Ashanti fought the British across multiple wars. So why did Ethiopia succeed at staying independent when these others, despite real victories, were eventually conquered? A few things stacked together here. Geography mattered enormously. Ethiopia's highland terrain, with its mountains, deep gorges, and difficult logistics, made any invading forces' supply lines a nightmare and gave defenders enormous tactical advantage. This wasn't open savanna or coastline, it was some of the most defensible terrain on the continent. Scale and unity mattered too. Menelik wasn't defending a single city-state or chiefdom. He commanded an empire that could mobilize population numbers most colonizers simply hadn't budgeted for. Weaponry parity mattered. Other resistance movements often fought rifles and cannon with spears, or at best mismatched older firearms. Ethiopia fought European guns with European guns, purchased through savvy, patient diplomacy rather than acquired in desperation. And timing and diplomacy mattered. Menelik exploited rivalries between European powers, playing France, Russia, and Britain off against Italy's ambitions, securing arms deals and diplomatic cover that isolated Italy rather than letting all of Europe gang up at once. Put simply, Ethiopia wasn't conquered because it fought a 19th century European war with 19th century European tools on its own terrain under unified command. And won. The shockwaves from Adwa went far beyond Ethiopia's borders. Across the African diaspora, the battle became a symbol, proof, for people living under colonial rule or the legacy of slavery, that European domination wasn't a law of nature. Ethiopia's victory echoed for decades through Pan-African movements, through the Rastafari faith's reverence for Ethiopia, through anti-colonial leaders who pointed to Adwa as evidence of what was possible. Italy did eventually occupy Ethiopia, but not until 1936, under Mussolini, using poison gas and air power in violation of international law. And even then, the occupation lasted barely 5 years before Ethiopian resistance, alongside British forces, expelled the Italians during World War II in 1941. So even Ethiopia's one brush with foreign occupation was brief, brutal, resisted fiercely, and reversed. At a moment when nearly the entire African continent fell under foreign rule, one nation's combination of sharp diplomacy, hard-won weapons parity, defensible terrain, and sheer unified will meant it simply never had to be liberated, because it was never conquered in the first place. That's why on the map of colonial Africa, there's a hole right in the middle of it, and that hole has a name: Ethiopia. If you found this story as wild as I did, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the history battles that didn't make it into your textbooks.